Hello, today we'll be continuing with our piston cylinder assembly. So far what we did yesterday is we created our frame over here and we created our piston, or at least our piston head. Now what we want to do is we need to create the other two pieces so we can put it together in an assembly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create the linkage. That would be this part right over here that connects the piston head and the shaft. So I'm going to go over to File, hit New, and start a new part. Once again, we have to show the planes, choose IPS in the bottom right, and now we're ready to go with our inches as our selected unit. What we're going to start with is we're going to use Sketch on the front plane, and we're going to use the slot feature. So over here, there's a slot feature for underneath the Sketch tools. If I hit the drop down arrow next to it, there's something called a center point straight slot. We're going to be using that. So if I select on that, so click that, I'll draw from the origin and click up top here. Now I can expand out to create my slot. I'm going to make this 3.5 inches long. So I'll select some smart dimension and make it 3.5 inches long. I'm measuring center to center, not tip to tip. Then I'm also going to make the radius of the edge, let's see, I'll make it 0.5 inches, so 0.5 inch radius. That makes it 1 inch in diameter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the holes over here for the shafts, one for the cylinder or the axle on the piston, and one for the one that's going to be on the drive axle. So I'm going to first shift click these two, and on the left underneath the properties I'm going to make them equal. So no matter how big I make this, the other one matches its size. So I only have to dimension 1. Then I'm going to dimension this to 0.5 inches. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude it, and I'll make this 1 inch in diameter, 1 inch in thickness. I'm going to use mid-plane so it's symmetric along the planes. So check mark, and that's essentially our linkage. I'm going to Control S and save it as linkage. And then we can move on to our final part, which is the shaft. So I'm going to File New, choose Part, and this will be our last part before we go on to the assembly. So I'm going to show my planes, and then I'm going to choose IPS in the bottom right for inches. So now what we need to do is we need to make the shaft. The way that the shaft works is a little bit different than usual like straight lines, like straight shafts. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an axle. I'm going to make this cylinder 0.5 inches in diameter, and then I'm going to extrude this 0.5 inches, and you'll see why in a second. After I extrude it, not using midplane by the way, I'm going to sketch on this face, hit Control 1 to give me a top-down view, and use the slot feature. This time I'm going to hit straight slot after I hit the drop-down arrow, and then I'm going to click on this, the origin, and drag down so it's in line, and it should snap in line with that plane. Now once I let go of it, I can drag out to how big I want this slot to be, and then I can start dimensioning it. I am going to go ahead and make this, I can make this 1 inch long, so 1 inch, and then I'll make the radius over here 0.5 inches. Now I'm going to go ahead and extrude it 0.25 inches, and hit enter. Now the last thing we do before we mirror it, because we're actually going to mirror this alongside this middle plane, is we need to make the rest of the shaft. This part is what's going to connect to the linkage, which is going to connect to the piston. So I'm going to make a sketch on this and use Control 1 to give me a good view. Select the circle tool, and if I highlight this edge of the slot, you will notice that a small dot in the center pops up, and I can use that as the center of this radius. So I'll make a circle there, and I'll smart dimension it to be 0.5 inches, and then I am going to extrude it 2 inches, and then I'll hit enter, or the check mark. Now we're going to mirror this alongside this plane So you'll see how the actual shaft is going to be. So underneath linear pattern, you hit the drop down arrow and choose the mirror option. It'll ask you for a mirror face plane, and you choose this, and it'll ask you for features to mirror. So we have three features: the beginning cylinder, the slot, and the end cylinder. So I choose this, this, and this, and then if I hit the check mark, you'll notice that it's perfectly mirrored over here. Now what I have to do is I have to hit Control S, save it. I'll name it shaft, and then I can hit save. Now all four of our things are saved. We can go ahead and hit File, New, and this time instead of choosing Part, we're going to choose Assembly. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to open up this Begin Assembly page on the feature tree, and it's going to ask you what you want to put into the assembly. And you'll see listed here the four parts that we currently have open and saved. So I'm going to hit Frame, Shift-click Shaft, so all four of these are selected, and I'm going to start dropping them. It's important that you choose Frame first, because the way assemblies work is that the frame is going to be fixed in place. So once I click everything down, all of these parts are now in the assembly. You'll notice that there's an F next to frame in the feature tree. This means that while all the parts can move around, this cannot. It's fixed in place. It'll give me a warning that says the selected component is fixed. It cannot be moved. And you'll probably see the same thing on your screen too. That means that we don't really have to do anything with this because it's fixed in place. And if we mate or connect things to this frame, then we don't have to further define it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to start putting things together. So I'm going to start with this shaft over here. The way mating works is it's just connecting one part to another. I want to put this cylinder inside this shaft hole. So I click this, hold Shift, and then click this. And once I let go of Shift, a small menu will open up which will ask, what do you want to do with these? I'm not going to pay attention to these. These are like quick mates. But I'm going to click on the mate button in the top left, which is probably easier to see. And you'll see it's going to immediately put these two together. And it's going to choose a mate from the standard mates. I'm going to choose concentric. This means that these two cylinders are going to be perfectly in line. And I'm going to hit the check mark. Now these two, now this circle and this cylinder, are perfectly in line. It can spin, but you'll notice that it can't move forward or backward other than in this position. And we're going to go ahead and mate that soon. Now what we want to do is we want to mate the linkage. So I want to mate this center axle to the bottom of the linkage. So holding Shift, I'll select both of these, hit the mate button, and choose the concentric option. Now I don't want this to keep spinning wherever it wants to, like go wherever it wants to. I want this to be in place on this plane. So I'm going to select this face. I'm going to shift click and select this face as well. I'm going to hit the mate button, and this time I'm going to choose coincident. You'll notice it automatically chose that. What this is going to do is it's going to keep these two faces against each other, and that's essentially all the mate's going to do. Forever, those two faces are going to be right next to each other. So I'll hit check mark, and now I can't spin this independent of this. Okay, now the final thing I want to do is I need to put the piston in place. Once again, I'm going to use the concentric mate. If I let go of Shift, once again that menu pops up. I'll choose concentric because I just want to quickly mate it. And then what I'm going to do is I can push it up and down. I'll push it out of the way. And you'll see this cylinder over here and this cylinder in the linkage. I want to concentric mate these. I'll hold Shift and click on these two, and I'll choose concentric over here. Now everything is good except this can move wherever it wants to, side to side. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to mate this face to this face. So by shift clicking both of these and choosing coincident from the menu that pops up after I let go of Shift, I can then mate these two together. Okay, so that's essentially the assembly. There are only a few key mates on the feature tree. If you hit the drop down arrow next to mates, you'll see all the mates we created. Now, the thing that you should notice is that over here it says underdefined. This means that your assembly can move. Usually this is very useful in making sure that you don't have anything that you haven't mated correctly. But for things like this that rotate, it's always going to say underdefined because something is always going to be free to move. Something that you can do to make sure that this doesn't say underdefined is underneath a concentric mate, you right click it and you choose lock rotation from the menu that pops up. Now this is locked in place. I cannot rotate it, and over here it'll say fully defined. Usually when it says fully defined, that means that all your mates are perfect and you're not missing out anything on your assembly. And now the only thing left for us to do is Control S and save it. I'm going to save it as engine assembly. So you can see that in the top right corner. That should be it. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about how assemblies work. Feel free to practice this kind of stuff on your own. But otherwise, for this assembly, this is it.